Most of what we do in life, we try to measure somehow in order to see its effectiveness and whether or not it's successful. So think of YouTube, right? YouTube, we go by subscriber count, viewership, and all that stuff. And podcasting, it's downloads. In terms of movies, it's box office or streams or whatever else, right? And in the greater scheme of things, boiled down, these are called KPIs, key performance indicators. And they're all through the corporate world, throughout business. We want a measurement of like, what are we measuring against? And I get that need for it, but I also want to kind of re-examine that whole notion, because none of it means fuck shit. And we need to just kind of throw out the notion entirely, at least on an individual level. And I want to kind of really examine this through a few lenses to really get at it in terms of what I'm talking about. But let me kind of introduce this. Like, in the grand scheme of things, we will never know the impact of our actions, of our work, and things like that on a greater whole, right? And to try to deduce it, like, we have such a limited form that we always try to get rid of all the variables and really try to understand it. And in some sense, that's a noble cause, but we also have to know that there are so many limitations with those measurements, right? That is such a myopic viewpoint of it all. So, case in point, here's an example, right? So, Marissa Serafini and I do a monthly book club discussion, right? You can check them out on my YouTube channel as well as on my podcast, and we discuss books. And about a year ago, we discussed this book called This Earth of Mankind, which is an Indonesian book. And, we like to pick books that might not be as well known and, kind of highlight them and whatnot, and also just expand our literature and what we're familiar with, right? That way we can, stupid, sappy, cliche as it may be, just be better rounded people. Well, very recently I got this response back to that episode. Hi, I'm Indonesian and I really like your review video. It's rare to find foreigners who discuss Indonesian literature, and I'm so happy to have found this video. You started with a great book, This Earth of Mankind, which is the Baru tetralogy. There are 3 more books by Pradyoma Pram Odya. I apologize, I'm butchering, that's the author's name, but I'm butchering and I apologize for that. That you should definitely read. I highly recommend reading Child of All Nations. As far as I know, these books were indeed banned in the 80s and 90s during the New Order era in Indonesia. Students back then read these books secretly while being nervous because if they were caught, they could be imprisoned. From here alone, it's clear that Pram Odya Anatta Tor's books have a great power about humanity, democracy, and justice. So, it's amazing to know that books stand for something, right? We often think like, okay, through our work, yes, we might not be curing cancer, but that doesn't mean we should degrade what we're doing and the impact we can have. But to go into it with a nostalgia or an egoist and a narcissistic viewpoint of we want it to be a New York Times bestseller or this, like, no, you have to get down to brass tacks and, what's the process? Fall in love with the process. Want to make good art. Want to have, something positive or something meaningful ultimately to add to that that slew of voices that exist out there. I mean, too many people go chasing success as opposed to this. And listen, I'm not going to lie and say that people who follow trends and this and that aren't successful. And certainly, when you look at the work that I do, whether it's through my YouTube channel alone, like you can see, okay, I like compared to YouTubers, I don't even have 2,000 subscribers and most of my videos get less than 100 views. But what I'm talking about is the impact, and that's why I keep going at this. When people try to shit talk of like, why do you do it and this and that, I'm like, because of this type of letter, right? And I see this all the time, like the community that I'm very grateful to have cultivated and kind of slowly grow over time is that there's the length and depth and breadth of the connection, right? Is a lot more meaningful, and certainly more meaningful than I see on most social media or most online places, right? And I love that I'm particular about that, and that for the most part, we can have nuanced discussions, right? Because here's something else. So there's an amazing activist, writer, and so forth, named Loretta Ross. Brilliant mind, brilliant advocate. And she's not just a thinker. She applies it to actual work, right? And her work really is like, the central theme of it is calling in people as opposed to, pushing them out. So what that means, especially in today's politics, whatever side you're on, and by the way, the amount of sides and whatever that we're infinitely creative at coming up with ways to isolate people, and we're not like that, right? But what she talks about is wanting to call people in as opposed to shun them, right? And that is very difficult, and also requires you to not have, an ego about it and trying to change their mind. It has to come from a more genuine place. And because as she says it, rather than like yell at people, rather than just try to prop up the people that are being held, why not engage with the perpetrator so that way we can change their minds, hopefully. But you never know. I mean, she speaks about like, she will never know the true impact, of what she's doing. And to think that you can measure that is truly limited thinking. Because as she says, her work impacts in ways that she does not know, right? And so we can take that this concept that I'm talking about, apply it to art, apply it to life, and on all things. And it really just comes down to, again, as I said, the process, and just in general, when we talk about life, going about it from a kind-hearted nature, wanting to do good, these small acts of kindness, it's a low lift with a high yield. Like, just showing kindness to strangers, right, can have a world of difference. You don't know what someone's going through, but if it doesn't like cost you anything, it's just so simple, like, then do it, right? It does have an impact that you cannot measure. And we need to let go of that idea of wanting to measure it, because that's the beautiful aspect, right? I'll never forget, here's one last example that I kind of want to talk about because it's artistically related, right? So when we premiered my second movie, Finding Love in Bogota, it was a packed theater, literally. And, we'd worked so hard on it and stuff like that. And these were people that, hadn't been to Colombia, knew really nothing about Colombia, the stereotypical like, oh, drugs and this and that, blah, blah. And, some were sort of spiritually inclined, others weren't, but most didn't like really know ayahuasca, and that's a kind of a subplot of the whole thing in ways that you probably wouldn't expect, even by me saying that. But the point being that, if nothing else, like those roughly 200 people were so moved by the film, it had seeing them in that moment, right? Witnessing them experience that and the way they talked to me after had a tangible effect. Like you could see it. And that's a beautiful thing. So if nothing else, if all at that point, anyone, like if only those 200 people had ever seen that movie, that's enough, because I don't know how that's going to ripple out and stuff like that. And so, yeah, it's a beautiful notion that we don't know the impact we could have on people, but we know it exists. And therefore, to try to be magnanimous, to try to be kind-hearted, do good in the world, that's what we have to kind of do. And when we can do that from an honest place, over time, it does have an impact in ways that we cannot even begin to predict. And that, to me, is the most miraculous aspect of all of it. and in terms of the advocacy work that Loretta Ross does, like, she's seen it, she's really floored by change is possible, but we have to get out of that limited form of thinking. So, just wanted to introduce that throw out we live in a capitalistic society, yes. And, we have to, as artists, ultimately book sales and record sales and, ticket receipts from a movie and stuff like that. We have to play that game for sure, but also in your heart of hearts know that there's an impact that is immeasurable, and that is the true beauty of the world that we should aspire to go towards, highlight, and be a part of. So, at least I think.